Hi there, it's Jen, and thanks for joining me today. Today's video, I'm going to be sharing a few different ways to use stencils with alcohol inks. And so for this first project, I am using the Marabou alcohol inks, which are pretty cool. They're a little bit different than the Ranger as far as mainly packaging and consistency. I did do a review on these inks. If you're interested in the video, I will link it. So I'm trying to make a point of notating the colors I used, which I did a little bit in this video. So I know the first two colors, these two colors, the blue is the Caribbean and the kind of greenish color is agave. And so I'm just taking those two colors, kind of spreading that around, and I used some of the blending solution to do that also. So I'm just spreading some different colors onto the craft plastic. And then to get the best result, or I shouldn't say that. If you don't want the color to spread a lot when you place your stencil on, it's best to kind of get the alcohol ink so it's not in huge puddles. So it's tacky still, but not completely dry, not completely wet, kind of in between. So you're just going to lay your stencil down on the panel and kind of push to, get it to kind of sink into the color. And then take your heat tool. And even though this craft plastic handles heat better, it's still a good idea to heat the tool up before you take it to the plastic, and also to do it in short increments. As you can see, I added a little bit of the rainbow color that is in the Marabou line. So I'll just take this and set it aside to dry, and then I will create a card with this one. But I really like the detail that stencil gave. So here are my swatches for the alcohol inks. I just recently swatched these. And when I say consistency of the inks, you can kind of tell here. These are both just a drop down onto the paper. And you can see that on the swatch for the Ranger, it spreads a lot, while the Marabou kind of stays in one area unless it's activated with a blending solution. So for this next card, I am going to do the stencil on top, or put the stencil on top like I did in the first example. So I'm just using some pinks. I kind of mix and match between the Marabou inks and the Ranger. So I used the Snow Cap in Ranger, and I believe the rest of them were the Marabou. So I'm just getting it so it's a little tacky, but not completely dry, not completely wet. And I'm going to place the stencil over it, over the panel. And again, take my heat tool until it is fairly dry. Again, you have the stencil, which I'm sure if it gets hot enough, it will melt. So you just got to be careful with putting the heat kind of on and off until it gets fairly dry. And it's really easy to clean the stencils with I use my isopropyl alcohol, the 91%, just taking a paper towel and removing the color from the stencil. So this is the second card. I'm actually using Yupo because I wanted to see how much the heat would affect it. And it actually didn't affect it that much because I had it taped down. So this one, I went ahead and I took the same stencil and I used my removable, I don't know if it's called removable, it's basically a stencil spray, so it's easily, it doesn't permanently adhere. So I thought I would try doing the stencil down first and putting the color on top of the stencil. And so I'm just going to take a few colors and spread those around. And in the end, when you look at both panels together, they are pretty much the same. So I don't think it matters whether you lay the color down and then the stencil on top, or whether you lay this color down and the stencil on top. Did I just say that? The only difference would be so here are the two panels. They both turned out pretty. the color didn't spread really more on one or the other. The only difference would be if you didn't have really something that adhered the stencil to the paper really well, you might have some problems with some seepage underneath. So if you didn't have the spray, I would probably do the method where you do the color down first and then the stencil on top after that. So for this next card, it's a Halloween one, and I'm using this Echo Park stencil. It is called Spooky Spiderweb. And if I didn't mention, that first stencil that I used on the first two examples was Echo Park also, and the stencil was called Always and Forever. So for this one, I went ahead and I put black alcohol ink on the panel and let that dry fairly good. And then set the stencil on top and heat set that a little bit. So doing this, if you don't want to use your blending solution at all, because what I'm basically doing is kind of layering the color on top. I want the black background with the orange and the purple to be kind of the spiderweb portion. And if you use blending solution, it's going to reactivate that black background, so you're just going to have a mess pretty much, and it's not going to give you that definition of the orange and the purple stencil. I really like how this one turned out. I like the cobwebs and the purple and the orange. For this last example, I'm going to go ahead and take this stencil, which is called Floral Bouquet, and it's Echo Park again. And I'm going to paint with it basically. So I'm taking this is 91% isopropyl alcohol. And I'm just taking a piece of plastic packaging to use kind of as my palette. And I'm just going to go ahead and put the alcohol ink on that. And I'm taking an old paintbrush that I don't use for anything. This is a small, kind of a square, flat paintbrush. And I'm just dipping it in the isopropyl alcohol and then dipping it in the color. I don't want this to bleed a whole lot, so I'm trying not to use a whole lot of either of those. It does end up bleeding a little bit in some areas, but not too bad. And I don't have this secured with, spray or anything. It's just taped down. So for the coloring portion, I'm just going to go ahead and insert some music here. If you want to go ahead and fast forward past this portion, feel free to do so. And I'll catch you back after the coloring is complete. I do speed it up though. It's not in real time, so it won't take that long. So after I colored through the stencil, I'm just taking some of the ink and splattering it with my paintbrush. And that is the panel. So I go ahead and assemble several cards using several of the panels that I created. This one right here, I am using the AltENew Mega Thanks die. So I wanted to mention, if you're going to be die cutting your panels, your alcohol ink panels, to go ahead and make sure that they're completely dry. I waited overnight because from a past experience, I did not wait long enough apparently on one of my previous projects, and the alcohol ink transferred to the die, which was it's not horrible to clean it, but you know, you have all the little crevices in a die, and it's kind of hard to get off. But it's just like any coloring medium. If you just use Distress Oxides and they're not completely dry and you try and die cut thing, you'll notice that the ink will transfer to the die and then need to be cleaned off. So I just wanted to mention that. And I also wanted to mention that if you're using the graphics craft plastic, it's not as easy to cut as a piece of paper or cardstock, and you might have to shim it or even run it through several times. I ran these dies through several times, but I still had to use my craft knife in some areas to get the die to completely come apart from the panel. So on this card, I am using a Simple Story stamp set to place these little spiders. So as with any ink on a smooth surface or non-porous surface like plastic, you just want to make sure you go straight up and down so that your stamp isn't moving and distorting your image. So those are two of the cards I created. The third one I created, I did not show the process, but I do show a still shot. That's probably my favorite one. I use the Stamp Market Leaves cover die, and that's with the pink panel. And that's it for me. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it or found it informative, please go ahead and give me a thumbs up. Thanks so much for joining me, and I hope to catch you later. Thanks so much.